Welcome back to our Object Relations Thinking and Theory series. I want to discuss a very, very special topic for women today about the female development and the role of the internal father in the development of a creative woman or in the development of creativity in women. How much the role of the father is significant in success and creativity in women, and how that then is also related to having a substantial self developed at the earlier level with the mother in order for that to blossom with the father, and the problems with it when the father isn't the kind of man that can appreciate his daughter's creativity and give her energy and motivation, when the father has pathology that prevents that, or when there is a father who could give that, but then the early mothering has been disrupted and the self isn't solid, self isn't integrated or separated or individuated. And then the father becomes too idealized, has too much power, and always turns demonic because the woman gives up too much power to the man when the earlier sense of self separate from a man isn't developed through the early relationship with the mother. So we have new research today, in fact, that shows this critical role of the father in a way that goes way beyond what Freud talked about when he talked about edible erotic desire in a child towards the opposite sex parent, a little girl towards a father, and an erotic desire developing from 3 to 5 years of life when she's in the edible stage. Well, we know about that instinctual stuff. That certainly is very well known today. What we know less about is another side of a female development that's more of her sublimated energy, which has been studied and written about by Laura Himes Tessman. And she writes about in certain papers on early tones, later echoes, and others. The references to that are in my book, The Compulsion to Create, Women Writers and Their Demon Lovers. That book, I really go in depth in one particular chapter. The whole book is about women, creative women, and well-known women writers, and the creative process and the mourning process. But in one chapter, I go particularly into female development because there were so many misunderstandings about female development. As we know, Freud said, "What does a woman want?" and didn't have a clue, and actually really steered people in the wrong direction about female development, despite his brilliance in so many matters. So, of course, I wrote 2 books on well-known women artists and writers, The Compulsion to Create and The Creative Mystique, because I wanted to focus particularly on women in the creative area. There have been so much written about male creativity and male artists. And these books came out in 1993 and 1996 with Routledge, The Compulsion to Create, Women Writers and Their Demon Lovers, and then The Creative Mystique, From Red Shoes Frenzy to Love and Creativity. And now today we have new versions republished with new editing, new illustrations, and new chapters in each with ORI Academic Press. So those who buy it today are fortunate to get these beautiful illustrations and lovely editing and a new chapter in each one on Virginia Woolf and The Compulsion to Create, along with the study of Woolf and The Creative Mystique, and another chapter in The Creative Mystique. But in these books, I deal particularly with the female and female development and how early disruptions in mothering are so critical in terms of affecting whether a woman can actually mourn and work on her psychological development in her creative work, or whether she constantly repeats early trauma instead, with diminishing the returns then for all of her creative efforts and the breakdown of relationships in the world that goes with that and sends her into a compulsive form of creativity instead of recreative motivation. So these are all very intricate issues about female development, creative development, and the mourning process of early loss that can renew creativity and love in all of us. And in women, it affects how she actually manifests her creativity in the world, which hadn't been written about before. In fact, in the early more classical psychoanalytic writings. And I have this in my third chapter in the Compulsion to Create, where I write about female development. It was so misunderstood about female creativity that it was thought actually that because a woman had internal genitals and because she had to be submissive to the mother in the Oedipal stage in order to get along with the rival parent, that she actually wouldn't flourish in her creativity. But this isn't true. But what we find out now is that the father is a major factor in this. This was of great interest to me because in my early development, my own father was very much applauding and appreciative and promoting my creativity. My mother, in different ways, gave me creative opportunities, but that sense of being admired and appreciated for my creative efforts I did get from my father. So when I was studying women artists and writers, I was seeing how this all played out with both the mother and father factors. Now, Laura Hines Tessman has shown in her studies, and I have this in that third chapter in the Compulsion to Create too, that when the most critical variable for how successful a woman is, how much she actually manifests her creative self-expression in the world, not just keeping it to herself, that is very much dependent on the role of the father and whether she's allowed to be part of her father's interests, intellectual and creative interests, whether he allows her to be part of that, whether she can both identify or whether as I was thinking of in the case of myself and others, that getting just the attention and interest in the budding potentials of creativity in the female by the father. So even better, rather than that she should identify with his creativity, that he's really attuned to her unique forms of creative development. So the father's so important, but when the father is either there are problems in many of these women artists and writers when the father was more hostile towards the creative efforts, but and then this had to be, there was a lot of longing for his interest in their writing. But there were also fathers that were very narcissistically interested in their daughter's creativity, and so kind of did give her that energy to create. But also, if those fathers may have had too much power in the woman's eyes, if he couldn't be less narcissistic and more really attuned to her development. But even more so, if the father was coming in the scene after early problems in primal self-development with the mother in the first 3 years of life, and particularly at the second year of life where separation, individuation takes place and self-integration, critical transitional stage that Winnicott talks about. If at that stage there are disruptions or inadequate or abusive or intrusive mothering that disrupts the bonding with the mother to nurture the self-development of the daughter, then the daughter will get a developmental arrest and have what we call certain aspects of character disorders. But she may be a brilliant intellectual and a brilliant artist. The problem in her manifesting that creativity in the world and also having a freer form of motivation and creativity as opposed to the compulsion to create, depends on her getting enough mothering to be able to sustain a creative process in the world with then the father's reflection. When there's an early disruption in the mothering, the girl gets so attached to the father and that she may feel she can only create or produce as if they're babies given to the father, like the Oedipal fantasy of giving babies to the father. But that if her creativity is totally taken over by that kind of fantasy, taken hostage to Oedipal desire, and then she won't be able to have a more comprehensive form of creativity separate from the father. So then she'll have to hook into a man in order to feel she has creative energies and can manifest her creative work and sustain it. So if there's a disruption in the self because of the mothering, the father may become too powerful in her mind, and he may become not only a muse for her, and other men could become muses, but he would become this God muse, like Emily Dickinson had and others, where the woman is driven to create, only feeling when they're merged with this God muse father figure. Without him, she feels totally lacking in fecundity and fertility, and creative fertility of all kinds. So when she's merged with this Godfather, she feels she can create, but then what does she create? When there's been an early disruption with the mother in the second year of life, she will repeat over and over the trauma of that, merged with her longing for the muse father, but he'll always turn demonic. So she repeats this demon lover theme, demon lover complex of being too totally dependent on the father. And he's not seen as just a human father. He's still seen as a muse godfather because she's never separated from the God image of an early mother and become a more separate self. So then the God muse father always turns demonic because obviously she in not being separate from him, her dependency on men make for a lot of rage and a lot of repetition of all of the early problems with the mother with the man, plus giving him so much power that she ends up longing for the muse and his turning demonic. And this becomes like a repetitive theme of the demon lover theme in the creative work of the woman. And instead of developing more in her creativity to express other themes as she grows, there'll be this constant repetition. Now, it can be done brilliantly by brilliant creative women, but the woman won't be able to develop psychologically in their work and mourn and heal early losses in their work unless they've had enough with the mother that the losses are maybe at the Oedipal level of the father. They can mourn that if they had enough with the mother. But if they didn't have that adequate mothering and they don't have an internal good enough mothering environment inside, as Winnicott would speak about, then they are too dependent. They become too dependent on the male figure that they look to be a muse. And this, you can see this in some artists like that I've written about in terms of Camille Claudel and the sculptor Rodin that she was involved with. When she separated from him, she created brilliantly, but she smashed her sculptures every year, and she ended up destroying her work because there was so much rage. She couldn't really sustain it without a father being literally externally present because she didn't have enough of the internal father, only because she didn't have a model for an object within with the mother. Because Camille Claudel actually had a father who nurtured her creativity, but she couldn't internalize him. She had to have him or Rodin, the father replacement, externally, because she didn't have that internal object mother that becomes a container and a model for then internalizing a father figure. So the woman becomes too dependent on the man, and then when she tries to break away from him, she can become self-destructive and suicidal. And this is all part of this muse, demon, lover theme and demon lover complex in creative women. It can also affect women in many ways and in their love life. I'm just talking about the creative aspect of women today. But we do know through research now how important the father is in the development of female success through their creativity in the world. And I really give a big kudo and a lot of credit to Laura Haim-Tessman for her work on that, because after Freud's lack of understanding of female development, researchers like Laura Haim-Tessman, who show through so much investigation that women can actually achieve greatly in the world, but that they also very much in need of the variable of the father as appreciating their efforts in order to manifest that in the world. Okay, so we have the good enough father, but he can only be internalized if there's a good enough mother to begin with. And you have a repetition of trauma rather than mourning, healing, and self-development in the creative work when you have developmental arrest with the mother. You have a repetition of trauma rather than mourning and new, renewed forms of creativity, working through losses like you had in Charlotte Bronte and Suzanne Farrell, the New York City Ballet, who could mourn in their work. The other women who were developmentally arrested could not mourn, heal, or develop in their work. If you want to see a beautiful piece of creativity where the mourning process is spelled out and written out, and you see psychological development in women who can mourn in her work, you should read my chapter on Villette in the Compulsion to Create about Charlotte Bronte's book, Villette, where I describe and show her beautiful mourning process through her actual novel there. And I have 2 chapters on her, but the chapter on Villette shows that she actually mourned and developed characters through the mourning process in her work. For the first time was able to marry after she wrote that novel because she had developed herself in the creative work through being able to mourn on her own inner creative work because she had enough of the internal mother. She then could write about all the issues with the father, all the Oedipal desires, and get that endeavor excitement with the male figure because she had had enough of the mother. Very big contrast in her sister Emily Bronte, which is also in the Compulsion to Create. And luckily now we have this book now through ORI Academic Press, and I invite you to enjoy those chapters on both Charlotte Bronte and Emily Bronte. Emily Dickinson is also in there, and Edith Sitwell, and you'll see all these, and Sylvia Plath, and you'll see all these strivings in women towards creative development, and those who succeed and those who repeat trauma and those who mourn in their work because of these factors of the mother and father that are spelled out in each of my individual studies of the women. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. So lovely being with you all again and sharing some of my thoughts on such an important topic as creativity, women, and the creative woman and her internal father.